Okay guys, I'm actually redoing this video on cams. I don't script any of my stuff. I just kind of rattle it off the top of my head. I did get too rambly on the first cam video. So the cams I'm going to run in these heads are going to be comp stage 3 blower cams. I know some people hate it when you call it a stage cam. What's that mean? This is a comp 106 460 cam, or 4 cams. They are 238 degrees on the intake at 50 thousandths and 240 on the exhaust at 50 thousandths. So that's the duration from 50 thousandths to 50 thousandths of lift, right before the seat opens and closes. I've got a stock cam standing right here next to me. I will show it real quick just to compare. Let's see here. Just to compare the lobes. I try to hold them side by side, get the lobes up in the same area. They'll kind of hang out side by side there. I actually readjusted the camera from last time, so it's a little bit. So I've got the comp right here. I'm trying to get it against the backdrop of my shirt there, so you can kind of see the difference. The stock cam has got a much more pointed lobe on it. The comp has got a much sort of more flattened off lobe at the top. You see the stock one's got pretty pointy, fairly pointed for, it's not pointed for a push rod at all, but for a 4-valve cam that's fairly pointed. So the comp cam is going to hold the valve open at a higher lift for a good bit longer, so you can maximize cylinder fill. It is a bit of a big cam. It's got, I think, 7 degrees of overlap. I think there are bigger cams out there now. It's JDM or Jim D'Amore Racing, L&M Engines. I know a couple others have what they call a pretty big cam out there for the GT500s. Back when I bought these cams, the GT500 might have just came out. I've had a 2-valve 5.4 in this thing before GT500s were even a thing. I can't remember when my first 5.4 went in the Mustang, but it was well before GT500s came out. And then I swapped to 4-valve around the same time, but I originally went 4-valve with the older B set of heads that I disassembled and a set of Mark 8 cams with that widened Cobra intake. And that set of cams, that car seemed like it had a lot more torque than when I installed this set of comp cams in the heads. A lot more low-end torque, I'll say. Maybe that's because of the overlap. Maybe that's because this comp cams, I didn't degree them in, and then I had a little bit of block work done. When I put the comp cams in, I went from a stock bore 5.4 to an overboard 30 over, which is what the block is currently. It's 30 over. And I think I posted a correction or wrote a correction on one of my videos. I think I called it 20 over. It's actually 30 over. It also had some deck work done, and one of the decks, they said one of the decks was out of true, so they decked it. They decked 40 thousandths out of it. I didn't think about it at the time, but that probably got that one cam's timing way out. But with the Mark 8 cams, I believe the car was running, and it was low compression, with Mark 8 cams and B series heads with a Cobra style intake that was widened. I'm wanting to say it was running 1290s consistently and no problem. A lot of wheel spin when I took it to the track that night. Tires weren't that great. The track wasn't prepped great. It was a bike night at the track, actually. I had friends that had bikes. We hauled their bikes in my car up there that night. So I was actually running fairly competitively with some 600cc bikes. The older, slower ones, not the newer at the time. The newer ones, I think that was around 2006, 2007. So that set of cams, it seemed to have a lot more low-end grunt. Granted, it didn't have any of the overlap. These cams seemed like the comp cams really dropped a lot of low-end, more than I would really like for a street-driven car. My preference would probably be to be back around like a stage 2, like a 230, high 220 to 230 duration cam is probably where I would like to be. I was looking for a set of FR 500s. They're not quite that aggressive, but they're not a bad cam, and they can be found cheap at times. I would actually probably have traded a set of cams or thought about selling these, and if I could get these cams sold, maybe buy a comp stage 2 cam. I had a stage 2 cam in my 2-valve 5.4 from comp. It was an XE270. I really liked that cam. That motor had a ton of down-low torque. The 5.4s do make good torque naturally. They're a 4-inch stroke motor, so they're going to make pretty good torque. The 4-valve heads take away a lot of that torque. The 2-valve heads, you still have a lot of torque. They won't make a lot more horsepower than a 4.6. You won't make this great horsepower number because they don't like to rev real high, especially with the 2-valve heads on them, unless you've got a lot of work done to them. But they do make a ton of bottom end download torque. And if you're racing with a 5.4 2-valve, you need to be shifting pretty early because you're spinning the motor and really going nowhere at the higher RPMs. You can really, if you've got good traction and hook them up, they make good power down low, and that's where you need to capitalize on the power curve. These cams should make good power up top. I think from what I've read on various forums, this comp 106 460, it's probably good for 40-50 horse on a 4.6, similar on a 5.4 in supercharged form. I'm not sure. You don't see too many people run them naturally aspirated because it's a more supercharged cam, and most all the 4.6s that put these cams in them are supercharged 03, 04 Cobras. I think, like I said, L&M, JDM, some of those companies have come out with a pretty aggressive cam for the GT500s. And I think they claim even up to 100 horse gains. This car is going to run naturally aspirated for a good while. Then if you look back to one of my really old videos, I've got an F1 Pro Charger. I had it on the car here before I tore it down this last time. I like that Pro Charger, but I'm definitely going to make sure I get the car up and running and tuned well pre-Pro Charger, because you throw a supercharger on it onto a car that already has issues, it just makes working those issues out a lot more difficult. So I do want to run around naturally aspirated. I ran it around naturally aspirated right before I took it down. I actually took it up to a Anderson car show not long before I took it down. And again, I had just pulled the Pro Charger off. Hadn't really done any tuning to tune it back in, so I'm basically running a large mass air through the intercooler naturally aspirated, because I still had the intake pipe set up. It's still sitting on there actually right now even. So I think on the dyno it made about 285 at the rear wheels, nothing special. I didn't have the spark. They didn't record the spark, so you don't get torque on it. So it was probably making decent torque, it just wasn't making real good horsepower. But again, I think these cams were degreed pretty far out just because of the way the block had been decked. So if I were you and I was going to be buying cams, if you want to go to more max effort and you've got a positive displacement blower or a twin screw that really makes up for that loss of low end, you can go pretty aggressive. If you're going to go Century, turbo especially, you don't want a ton of overlap anyway. These cams have a pretty good bit of overlap. I know there's more aggressive ones out there too, but for that street drivability, these are not the greatest cams on a naturally aspirated or Century car. And they did seem like they pulled real well up top, but that's just not really what I'm looking for every day driving around the street. I don't like the lug. At around 2,000 RPM, these cams particularly didn't seem to do perfect down there. They weren't making a ton of vacuum, So again, when I install them in these heads, I'm going to try to separate the center lines on them a little bit and take a little bit of that overlap out. I'm probably only going to get a couple degrees. I think comp installs either 116 or 114. I'll have to dig my cam card out and see. I think I'm going to take them to intake to 114 and exhaust to 120. Try to spread the lobes out and pull some overlap at top dead center away, and try to pick up the street manners just a little bit and see how that goes. I'll probably give up something somewhere else, but in the end, I'm not super worried about that. I'm really more worried about getting the car just a little more easy to tune and more streetable, because that's where it sees most of its time. This is a street strip setup. It's leaning more towards strip. I'm trying to pull that back a little bit. I've got 3 kids. In the other video I had, they were running around acting crazy. So I'm not going to have a ton of time to spend at the track, so it's nice to be able to get in the car and go for a drive and not have to worry about the thing hunting for idle all the time. And some of that's the tuner I have. I run an Anderson PMS in the car. It's not the greatest tuner down below 2,000 RPM anyway. I might have to go get a Super Chip. Whoever tunes now, it's used to be Super Chips. It's a tuner now, but I can't, or Diablo or something to do some tuning on the actual PCM. If you're familiar with the PMS, it doesn't do that. It's a piggyback. It goes in between the PCM and the main harness. It can modify things. It's got a lot of capability, but it doesn't have a lot of tuning ability down low. I'm trying not to ramble. I'm looking at the camera here to see how long I've talked. Trying to stay on the cam focus. If you've got a real good tuner local, which I don't, Anderson, I think they've gotten better. Anderson Motorsports is the closest to me. When I was originally doing this stuff, the PMS was probably one of the better tuning tools out. Now the little handheld programmers are much better with the GT500s, the 03, 04 Cobras. Anderson kind of abandoned that PMS and started doing more work with the handhelds, and I think they did get a lot better. And the PCMs have gotten better over the years. So they've gotten more competent with that than what they were, I believe. So I would be more willing to go and try that now with them. But if you don't have a good tuner, you got to kind of watch how wild of a cam you get, because drivability can be an issue unless you want to do the male tunes back and forth, and that's doable. I had a friend that did that. He had pretty good luck. I can't remember who he was doing it with, but the main thing, this is a 5.4. They're never going to spin real high, so these wild cams that make a lot of high-end horsepower, you might be giving up some, because usually you're not going to pull one much past 7,000 RPM. They're not like a smaller Coyote engine that really likes to rev. That's just because you're talking a 3.5 inch. The Coyote might be a 3.6 inch stroke. The 5.4 is a 4.165 stroke. It's got a lot more stroke. It does not like to rev. Yes, the drag teams are making them rev. Some of them de-stroke them. Some of them don't. But I think the crankshaft doesn't have a ton of rigidity at those higher RPMs. So it's not the greatest engine to rev real high. They really like to make power down low. These heads just don't particularly do that. So, and maybe it's just my preference. I like a 2-valve. I like that hit the pedal, instant torque. I'm not as big of a fan of hit the pedal and feel the power build. I kind of like that first kick, throw you in the back of your seat feel. So I'm trying to get as much of that back with the 4. I understand the 4-valve head's never going to give me that. I'm trying to get as much back as I can, basically. So that's the direction I'm going with the cams. The stock cam here, I need to look up the part number. It's an F2LE. This one's a 6A273 AE. I've got to look at what those came out of. If they could be 96, 98 Cobra cams, or they could be Mark 8 or a newer Cobra cam for all I know. I need to look that up and see what those are. One thing I'll say, I don't know if somebody ran the wrong springs in these things or what the deal is. I'll use this dirty rag because I'm not really worried about ever running these, but if you'll notice here, the lobes have some pretty bad discoloration on them and even a little pitting in places. And I don't know if that's from running too much spring rate, the wrong spring, or what that's from actually. Or if it sat and had a lot of corrosion maybe, because there's this one that got a little bit on the base circle. These others have it on the ramp and the nose. And this comp cam here, this comp cam's had miles on it. It's probably got 5,000-6,000, maybe 10,000 miles on it. I'm not exactly sure how many miles they've got on them. They look perfect. I don't see any problem with those. I'm running comp Beehive springs. Maybe somebody had an aggressive set of springs in that other set of heads that ran with these cams, or I'm not sure what would cause that heavy marking on the cams like that and that kind of pitting. If you know, chime in, leave a comment. The other thing I will say too is, as I've been assembling these heads and moving them around, this cam, this stock cam, compared to this comp cam, the comps are gun drilled. You can actually see through them. The stock ones you can't. But the comp is a heavier cam. They've tried to gun drill them to take some weight out. It's a billet cam. This is an assembled cam. If you can see depending on how the shadows turn out. These lobes are pressed onto a shaft. The shaft is machined. I believe it is a hollow tube with the ends probably welded on, both ends here. And then they probably just machine the weld away to clean everything up. I actually kind of think that weld's probably sitting right in there based on the discoloration. Let's see if I can show it. The way the discoloration in that area sort of changes. So the stock cams are lighter. These cams, this valve train does add a lot of weight. I've debated going back to 2-valve. I'll have a separate video to sort of talk my 2-valve versus 4-valve. I won't ramble anymore about that in this video. I've debated going back 2-valve to pick the torque up, and just cost. I mean, that set of comp cams, when I bought them maybe 8-10 years ago, I think I paid $1,200 for them brand new. The springs, I think, were close to $600. I think nowadays it's a $1,300. I think it's gone up a couple $100 for the cams and the springs as well. So it's a pricey upgrade. And if I was going to do it today, I would maybe look more towards the L&M or the JDM. They don't publish their specs, at least the JDM doesn't. But again, if you're going with a naturally aspirated or a turbo car, I would get a set custom made. It's not a big deal to get a set of custom cams made, and I would get a set that fits your application. That wasn't as common back when I first bought this set of cams. So I've got this off-the-shelf grind. And as you can tell, I'm not super pleased with the cam. Like I said, it's a little bigger than I want for what I'm doing with it. But right now, as this video and this whole series is showing, money's tight. I don't have a lot of money to throw into the car. I'm not going to throw a bunch of money into the car. So I'm going to make do with what I got. And we'll end up, it'll probably be a month or two, maybe more, but we'll end up seeing what the results are. So hope you enjoy the video. Mainly, I'm hoping this helps you make better decisions. Again, this is the 5th or 6th iteration of this 5.4 that I've put in this Mustang. I mean, I've gone from 2-valve to 4-valve, multiple iterations of both. A lot more iterations on the 4-valve side. So hopefully you guys can learn from some of my mistakes. I was younger, dumber, rushed through assembly of stuff. I missed things. I just sort of learn as I go. I read as much as I can. now with YouTube, I'll watch videos and stuff. There's not a ton out there on this stuff, but there's some pretty good videos. So hopefully this helps you guys make better decisions with your cars. So hope you enjoy. Like and subscribe. There'll be more to come.